Pick a 5-mile radius around you. Do you actually know who lives there, who works there, who passes through, and what would make them buy this week? Most companies don't, and the blind spot is exactly where physical retail still loses to digital.
You don't need to be perfect. You need to be really good. Importantly, you need to be better than you were.
My guest today is Jeff Swearingen, one of the people who figured out how to bring digital-level precision into brick and mortar before AI, retail media, or media to shelf had names. In this episode, Jeff breaks down how leading retailers and CPGs actually connect media to shelf, why most AI programs collapse at execution,
You can have the best data in the world, and if you don't have the ability to execute it, it'll all fall apart.
and what executives consistently underestimate when they try to modernize physical retail. If you care about retail media, store-level growth, or making AI show up in revenue, this is the playbook. Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Reimagine with AI, brought to you by Sigmoid. I'm your host, Imtiaz Ahmed, and I help executive leaders create value with the smartest minds in artificial intelligence. You may not realize it, but behind every major innovation in retail, media, and technology, there's a team wrestling with how to make AI real and valuable inside massively complicated matrixed organizations. On this show, I sit down with the business and technology leaders who are doing exactly that. Reimagined AI explores how today's most forward-thinking enterprises are using data, AI, and automation to transform how they operate and how they grow. Because it's not just about adopting new tools, it's about reimagining what's possible. Let's get into it. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Reimagine with AI by Sigmoid. I'm your host, Imtiaz Ahmed, and I have the pleasure of having Jeff Swearingen on our show today. We want to go straight into all the insights that he's going to share today. But firstly, welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here.
Jeff, you began building, predicting, and granular analytics for brick and mortar stores before it was even fashionable. What was the moment you realized physical retail needed the same level of precision that digital businesses were already using?
I think it would be a little bit revisionist history to say there was a single moment. It's one of those things when you look back, you can tell a very clean story. At the time, I'm not sure it was quite that clean. But around 23 or 2014, it became 2013, 2014, it became really obvious that big data, machine learning, and early forms of AI were having an impact on retail and on consumer products companies. And you could see it in the adjacencies around our core businesses, even though it wasn't visible every day in our core business. You could see it in the adjacencies, and you could begin to see the impact it was going to have.
So in the early days, you created one of the first large-scale consumer and retail store data sets. What did you get right that others missed at the time? And what were your biggest mistakes and lessons that you garnered over that period of time?
I think a lot of folks were moving at similar speed. So I won't say that we necessarily were terribly ahead of the curve, but I do think that we had an intentionality. And I give a lot of credit to the senior leaders at the time for the intentionality and making a bet in this space. I also give a lot of credit to collaboration. We spent a lot of time with the brilliant retailers listening, asking questions and listening, and going in without the assumption that we had the answers, but with the intention of working together to find a path through. And then, maybe a third would be, we did spend a lot of time studying adjacencies, because while the capabilities weren't mature in our core business, you could see them in adjacent businesses. And there were a lot of lessons that could be learned and reapplied to our businesses. In terms of things that, we wish we could do over, I think the operational complexity of a massive change is just always bigger than you think. And so getting the technical parts right, that wasn't easy, but getting the operational change in place and being able to move a big organization forward together against common purpose is a challenge.
So just in terms of getting executive buy-in for projects that span multiple years, and when, the value isn't created in year or even in the next year, because, you need the foundations there to actually start to realize the value maybe in year 3, year 4, year 5. How do you navigate the executive teams in order to build that level of trust and make that level of commitment?
I think there are a few things. One is, I do think there was a lot of evidence around us that this was a change that was going to take place. And I think part of that evidence was coming directly from our largest retail partners. And that brings a lot of weight when you hear it from your customers, that this is a change that we need to be a part of leading, not following. I also think that you have to have a mindset that you're a startup and that every year you have to go back for another round of funding and you have to earn that every year. And so we never went into it with the sense that we had a right to multi-year funding. We went into it with the sense that every year we had to earn funding. And so we had a mindset from the beginning that the actions that we were taking needed to show up on the P&L. And while it may not have been dollar for dollar in the early years, that mindset, I think, made us more commercially oriented and more committed to finding a way to drive financial value in the early days.
I think that also drives the ownership there to, really be bought into your business and bought into the initiative, so that there's that accountability there at the end of the year, or when you're asking for that next round of funding to continue on the path. When you treat it like it's your own thing, that gets respected and that gets obviously funded as well. Now, just to give our audience a bit of detail in terms of, the things that you were looking at, I would say it was way ahead of the time. You're being very helpful in terms of saying that, a lot of other people are doing it at the time. But you've described the idea of dropping consumer propensities on a physical map so sales teams could act with digital level precision. How did that fundamentally change the way marketing and sales work together?
We started using this term media to shelf. And that became, it's funny as you go through these transformations, if you're lucky, there are a few things that catch on and you know that you're on the right path when you walk into a room and you hear other people using the terms and speaking the language, and it doesn't require any prompting from you. And this term media to shelf quickly was adopted by the organization. And there was a lot of power in that because we had the great fortune of having, I would say, the best, but certainly one of the best retail execution organizations in the world. And we knew that if we could connect the power of marketing, the power of media to that organization, that we could create an experience from media to shelf that would delight consumers and would delight our retail partners. And that was the North Star from the beginning, was creating delight in our retail partners and in our consumers. And so once people latched onto the idea of media to shelf and the idea that that could differentiate us, create competitive distinction, and could enable us to better delight the people that we served, then it became a pretty powerful notion in the company that helped propel us forward.
So in terms of understanding, the core functionality in terms of what propensity or consumer propensity would look like on a physical map, can you break that down in terms of, what does that practically mean for someone considering their media investments and how that impacts store level sales?
Yeah, I'll give you three things to consider. You can look at any physical area and you can understand who are the people that live there, that work there, that pass through that area commuting. And to a degree, you can understand the things that are uniquely motivating to them. That kind of data is available, and you can do it in a way that is confidential and private. You're not looking at IP specifically, but you're looking at trends that help you understand propensities of shoppers in an area, consumers in an area. When you understand that physically, then you're able to overlay that and understand what retail environments exist in that same area. And you can begin then to predict where those consumers are most likely to become shoppers and most likely to be open to converting on certain purchases. And things come into play like, what are the other adjacencies in a physical area? Are you near an intersection? Are you near a fire station? Are you near a hospital? Are you, what are the things that are in the area? And how do you take into consideration the other points of interest in the area, the consumers that are in that area, and the physical retail environments that are in that area? And you put all that together and you're able to then better predict which environments should have which products on display, which products should be promoted, and where should you add local media, digital media to create awareness and interest.
One of the use cases I really like in this space is particularly within healthcare, when you have specialist doctors, whichever profession, whichever specialization we're talking about, but let's call it pediatrics for the time being as an example use case. Looking around pediatric facilities and the propensity of, for example, the baby category, and the performance of the baby category near maternal hospitals / pediatric clinics are obviously of interest. Now, when you take those signals of who is that shopper around that area, and you're mapping it to what are the retail points of or the retail availability that we have there, those are two correlative signals or causal signals that you can essentially map and execute against. So how did you kind of figure out the execution part of that media to get it to that level of granularity?
Yeah, I would add one other thing just to your example. One of the things that we learned along the way also were marker categories that became surrogates for the categories we were interested in. So I'll give you an example. One of the products in our portfolio was highly correlated to banana sales. And so one of the data points that you would add in is if you knew there was a high development of banana sales in a retail outlet, that was a marker category for one of the products in the portfolio. And then you just do an index. Are we under or overdeveloped? What's the opportunity? One of the things that we always looked for was what we call latent demand or unrealized demand, where the propensities were high for certain products to do well, but they weren't necessarily doing as well as they could. And why was that? And what were the changes that we could make? Once you understand those, then you get as sharp as you can on media first, and you try to dial in through digital media, through social, through all of your highly targeted capabilities. You try to dial in as closely as you can to first identify and engage the highest propensity consumers, and then to deliver a message in a way that's uniquely motivating to them. So I'll give you an example. There are many products that were in our portfolio where we could speak to someone about great taste. We could speak to someone about family gatherings and being together with friends and family. We could speak to someone about health and wellness. And there could be a product where all three of those messages have resonance to consumers, but not all consumers. So being able to identify the ones that are going to respond to the health and wellness message and deliver that, ones that are going to respond to an enjoyment, friends and family message and deliver that. So being able to do that's incredibly important. And then once you know where you're sending those signals, being able to connect that to the relevant retail outlets and show up with distribution, with shelf presence, and with promotion and display that delivers against the expectation you've created with that media. So that as consumers go into retail with that expectation, you're delighting them with what they find at retail.
Amazing. Funny category, which is personal insect repellents. And I grew up in Australia. So in Australia, that category experiences like 40 times the baseline sales the week before Christmas. So because everybody in Australia, the summer holidays are over Christmas, right?
Right.
Everyone's out on holiday that week, and that category of personal insect repellents, every year people buy it in summer and then they lose it over the preceding months, right? No, but even if you use like 10% of the bottle, you don't keep it. But if you don't nail that week in the key coastal stores where all of these families are essentially holidaying, then you basically miss out on the full year for this particular category. So you have that time-based or the seasonality-based demand planning, and that you can see that demand. But also there's an element of actually executing in those particular stores with the right amount of inventory and stock, but also, how do you nail that messaging over that key period of time to win against your competitive set as well. So, in terms of surprising and delighting consumers, one of the things that was so important to ensure that was being executed is having in-store display, because it's a category where, yes, it is top of mind because there are lots of mosquitoes, lots of bugs in Australia, but it's not necessarily a top of mind category until you experience it. So if you don't nail timing, placement, promo, and display at the right stores, you basically miss out on the category growth opportunity for this category in that entire year. So similarly, it sounds like the work that you were doing was essentially doing this at scale across multiple categories, across multiple geos, but nailing down what were those key insights that, from an audience point of view, but also from a location point of view, that needed to be prioritized and executed against. And you're essentially formulating that plan and executing against it, which is very cool. I want to move on to when you built the use case. You integrated targeted media, flavor propensity segmentation, retail assortment, promo strategy, and in-store execution. What did that teach you about how fragmented most organizations are still today?
Yeah, two comments, I guess. One, going back to the example you provided, one of the things that I think is an ante just to be competitive is that you show up at the peaks, the seasonal peaks, and that you compete to win at the seasonal peaks. I think the bigger challenge is how do you surprise and delight consumers and create demand in the valleys? And so the case study that you're asking about now is an example of that. One of the things that we talked about was granularity at scale. And to be able to win in the valleys or the non-peaks, you have to understand all of the things that uniquely motivate consumers around a category and a product and a brand. And you have to understand how that manifests every week of the year in every geography where you compete. Because just in the US, from coast to coast, from top to bottom, week to week, that's going to vary dramatically. And so you don't ultimately want to go to market with 5,000 different executions, even though if you find 5,000 distinct cells that you could execute against, you want to aggregate that to a number of executional pods that would allow you to actually go to market in a way that has scale, but in a way that's also distinct. And so it starts with enormous data, but then there is a real analytical component and judgment component in what is the right number of segments to execute against to bring that granularity to scale in a way that you can execute with excellence at retail. And so if you take an example like the one that you mentioned, you're going to start looking at a lot of different data points, and you're going to come up with many different ways in. And then you will try to execute those with scale across the full geography in a way that uniquely delights different consumer groups. Now, that is very difficult to do analytically. It's very difficult to do executionally, but it's maybe most difficult to do organizationally, because what it requires is getting large groups of people to work together against common purpose. And there are all sorts of great, analogies. And if you're standing on a big stage, you can talk about orchestras or rowing teams or all, there's a lot of ways of bringing this to life. But there's a lot of truth in that, is that when everything is note perfect and everyone is playing to position and everyone is working together toward common purpose, everyone's incented and motivated to do that, and everyone understands the vision, understands what's possible, and commits, of their own will, commits to the mission to work together, that's when it's magic. And those things are difficult. That requires great leadership, far beyond what the analytics may tell you is the right solution.
I love that. When you're an outsider coming in to these large organizations, it just looks like utter chaos. And sometimes you're like, how did we just achieve ABC? And your point is right. Like in terms of thinking about it, like the full commitment of an entire org or an entire team towards a certain goal or objective, that in itself brings enormous power to execute and get it done properly. So thank you for sharing that. I want to move on to looking at, a very fun term, which is fidgetal, bringing, physical and digital together in the real world. Most companies say that they integrate digital signals into physical execution, but almost none do this properly. So what's the single biggest blocker in your mind? Is it the data? Is it the org structure? Is it the incentives or the structures in place in these organizations when they're trying to make that integration actually work properly?
I think that it probably depends. My guess is that every organization has slightly different challenges, and every geography probably has slightly different challenges. I think that it starts with having data insight that allows you to understand how are you going to bet, what is the consumer problem that you're trying to solve? And if you solve that problem and you delight the consumer, how will they reward you? And if you break that consumer challenge down, you're most likely going to come up with components around how do you engage them in a way with media that is interesting and is motivating and captures their imagination. And then how do you pull that thread through every touch point along their journey as a consumer so that each touch point is at a minimum consistent with the prior touch point, but ideally is building on it and is telling a story to the consumer that results in a brand experience and a product experience that delights them. Now, that's a really nice, bedtime story. It's a very, very hard thing to do. And I do think that some of the basics that are required is you have to have a very strong operating model. You have to have a very strong planning process. You have to have some general alignment around the time frame that you're working against. So what do I mean by that? You may have the ability to change your media plan in real time based on real-time signals that you're getting. You may not have the ability to change your physical retail presence in real time. Maybe you can do that on a weekly basis. So you have to align expectations around your time frame, and your operating plan, I think, allows you to do that. The second is you have to commit to the purity of the message that you want to pull through. And, strategy by definition is sacrifice. And that means that there's some things that you're not going to talk about. There's some things you're not going to bring to life. And that's going to be hard because somewhere along the way, there's going to be an opportunistic moment where you could do something off strategy that might provide a short-term benefit. And you have to have the discipline to commit and stay committed through the process. And then I think one of the last ones is you have to do it in full partnership. If you're a CPG company that works with physical retail, you have to do all of these things in full partnership with your retail partners. Joint business planning with your retail partners, going from just selling to asking questions and listening and understanding what they're trying to accomplish, learning from one another, building joint business plans is a critical part of the journey. So I think having the operating model, I think having a clear strategy that you're committed to, I think doing it in partnership with your retail partners are all critical components. And then finally, I would say incentives and scorecards are always helpful. We tend to do what we're incented to do, and we tend to do what we measure.
Jeff, just a question in terms of, let's say you're in a scenario where, and my question is around handoffs, right? So you have different teams executing against a plan and a strategy. But sometimes there are teams that are more either incentivized or willing or committed to a certain project or cause or initiative, right? In terms of looking at that handoff that happens between teams to execute against something big, what have the lessons been in your career in terms of getting that commitment from a different team leader or team that isn't necessarily as committed to the initiative as your team may have been?
I think if you think of it, I'll go back to the big stage analogies. If you think of it like a relay race and you're passing a baton, one of the things that I think is important is to have a principle around who has the primary accountability for the baton being successfully passed to the next runner. And we always believed that if you're holding the baton, you have an accountability to make sure that the person that's in front of you gets the baton. And that may mean many things. It may mean having the patience to listen and understand the challenges that they face. It may mean having the empathy to know that they're dealing with things that you don't have to deal with. And, so there's always this, the risk that if your job is to pass the baton, you're just running up behind people and throwing the baton at them because you equate that to just getting rid of the baton. But that's not it. It's taking the time to understand the role that everyone in that relay plays. What are the challenges that they're going to face that may be unique to their role? And what adjustments can you make? Can you take the accountability to make to ensure that you pass it to the next person with the care that's required for them to be successful in moving it forward? And it just takes time. I think that we all move so fast that it's very hard sometimes just to take a breath, take a beat, and say, do I really understand my teammates, the people around me, what they need to be successful and the role that I can play in helping them be successful? That may sound soft in a conversation that in some ways is around analytics. That may sound soft, but
Yep.
what I would tell you is that it is the oil that makes the machine work.
I really like that because there's, working in, and essentially it's working in transformation now with all of this AI stuff across, every part of the value chain, every department across every organization, really. But it is all about change management in order to create the value. And you're up against so much incumbency and established process. And this is the way we've always done it. That, if you don't take the care to uplift the people that you're working with, and show them how their work becomes easier and they can, essentially focus on higher order things because the machines can do, the work a lot faster and easier for them, or make it easier for them. I think this is the primary reason why a lot of, generative AI and AI projects fail, because the adoption is simply just not there. The promise, the value, the pitch deck to sell it all in is great. But in terms of creating that value, at the end of the day, an organization is a group of people doing something together to create that value. So as we're implementing these things, we need to really take that care of understanding how this stuff will actually work, to create that value that we promise. So thank you for sharing that.
I care so much about this that I have a short blog that I'm going to be posting in the next few days, titled The Humanity of Influence.
Okay.
Because influence can have this very, Machiavellian perspective of coercion on one end of the spectrum. And then I would say maybe the humanity of influence on the other end of the spectrum. But I always said to folks on the team, as you go into these transformations, is it's incredibly important the first time or two that you meet with your constituents and your partners, don't try to push anything, sell anything, convince them of anything. Just try to listen and learn, ask questions, understand what they're trying to accomplish, understand how they're incented, what motivates them. What does success look like from their perspective? What challenges do they face? Take all of that on board and then come back to them in the third or fourth discussion with a proposal that considers the things that you've learned, and you're going to have a much better chance of creating a sustainable connection in that baton pass that allows you then to move together with speed.
Very cool. Coming back to coming back to more rigid things, when it comes to looking at digital determinism, we're talking to a CEO. How realistic is it to bring digital determinism into physical retail? Like, what does good enough actually look like based on the data that we have at hand when it comes to physical retail and digital signals?
Well, to go back to what I just said and to hold myself to the same standard, if I were talking to a CEO, I would first have a lot of questions about what
Yep.
success looks like, those sorts of things. What problem are we trying to solve? All of that's really important up front. That said, I think it depends on, to a large degree, on how you measure success. If you're in a pure digital world, you may have a standard that's, near 100%, very, very high. In a physical world, you may have a standard that's slightly different than that. You also may want to determine how important is it to be perfect. And in some things you do, being perfect is really important. In other things, being 80% right today is more valuable than being 100% right in 2 weeks. And so those things are all considered. But yes, I do think that you can get to a very good fit on a deterministic retail environment. I do believe that. Now, there are many things that factor in that, but I'll give you two to be brief. One is, what is the go-to-market capability that you have as an organization? I was, again, blessed to work for an organization that had arguably the best go-to-market capability in the world, with tens of thousands of people showing up every day to try to create perfect retail environments to delight consumers and customers. That's unique. If you have that, you have a better chance of success. If you don't have that, you have to have great retail partnerships and very clear aligned business objectives, and work together as one, in some ways, as one, to drive retail execution that fully leverages the investments that are being made upstream, so that consumers benefit from that connection, but the retail partner also fully benefits from the media investments that you're making as a CPG company, the promotional investments that you're making as a CPG company. I mean, as you're partnering with them, you want them to get the maximum benefit from that as well. And so that can be a great incentive in working very closely together to unlock something very close to deterministic retail environment. It's not pure play, but we often use pure play as a North Star. And we talk about, if you're in a pure play environment and all the signals are digital signals, all of the signals are digital signals, what does that experience look like? Now, if I try to overlay that to a digital and physical environment, where is it the same? Where is it different? Where do we have gaps? And what are all the things that we can do to mitigate those gaps? And how close can we get to perfect? And that the answer to that's not going to be the same in all environments. But if you take that approach in all environments, you'll give yourself the best possible chance of creating a really good retail environment that is as close to deterministic, as you'll be able to get with the particular strengths and opportunities that you may have in your organization.
Amazing. I think, the expectation of having perfect data in the offline world is, you shouldn't have that. But the agility of making decisions based on what you have and ensuring that that is faster than everyone else is, critical. Like Amazon has this notion of two-way door decisions versus one-way door decisions. There's like how many two-way, decisions that can be easily changed and have very little overall impact to your operating model, all the complex stuff. You should make as many of them as you can. And as long as, it's aligned to the data and aligned to the commercial strategy, you need to make as many of those as you can based on, the inputs that you have from a data point of view. I think waiting so much, especially in a big organization where you have the luxury of too much data sometimes, can obviously, impacts the delivery of teams against what their goals are. But, sometimes you just get comfortable with waiting for all of the information to come through, but there are just so many other people just moving extremely fast and taking up, the category and improving the sales over time. So I wanted to,
if I may add
sure,
just one thing, I
sure,
think that context of category is incredibly important. I'm a big fan of Jim Collins, and one of the quotes that I love from him is, great is the enemy of good. And I think one of the things that we have to be aware of is the more and more that we move into a digital world, there is going to be an expectation of great, because analytics, digital environments create this belief that you can get to perfect. And so if you can get to perfect, there's a desire to get to the perfect answer. Very rarely do you need the perfect answer in consumer packaged goods. If you're, in surgery, yes, please be perfect.
yeah,
Please take the time, be perfect. But in so many businesses, you don't need to be perfect. You need to be really good. Importantly, you need to be better than you were. You want to be better than your competition. But the question that we always ask is, are we better serving consumers? Are we better serving consumers? Are we better serving customers today than we did yesterday? Are the actions that we're taking improving? Are we doing it in a way where we can learn and continually improve? And if you're serving them better today than yesterday, and you're continually learning and improving, then just keep moving forward.
of course. In light of moving forward, I think one of the very cool things you've done is scaled programs globally, and you've scaled capabilities across analytics to over 20 markets with huge levels of complexity across different cultures, data quality, the retailer consolidation levels, regulatory constraints. Which of these is the real killer to creating value across a global organization?
I think there are two that come to mind. First of all, every situation is different. And I'll go back to what I said earlier. Understand the problem that you're solving, because every situation has a unique combination of challenges that you have to solve. That said, there are some very basic things that you have to get from the very beginning. If you don't have good, clean data, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be good. And you have to have enough of it to be able to, discern insight and to take a new action. If you don't have a data foundation, it's very difficult to implement these kinds of changes. And so, again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be deterministic level data. It needs to be data where you can at least get to principles that can allow you to take strategic changes that you're making in the market. So foundationally, you have to have good data. You have to have an aligned organization that's committed to the change. And that's the part at the beginning, which is before you go talk about data, before you talk about analytics, before you talk about machine learning or AI, ask questions and listen. What are the managers in these markets trying to accomplish? What are their dreams? What are their challenges? What's their competitive context? What's the unique consumer situation in those markets? Just listen. Listening helps you learn and helps you then execute a plan in a way that's going to give you a better chance of being successful. But listening also enrolls. It helps also capture the hearts and the minds of your constituents and your partners. It helps build trust that you're committed to doing something that's genuinely in their interest, not in your interest. So, do you have the data to do it? Have you invested the time to really understand your constituents, their markets, to build trust, to enroll them in the change? And then I think the third one is, do you have the ability to execute it? And that's where you're going to look at operational complexities, go-to-market complexities, retail dynamics. You can have the best data in the world. You can have an organization that's fully aligned to move forward. And if you don't have the ability to execute it, it'll all fall apart. So I think all three of those are things that you go in and say, are these things present to a degree that we feel like we can be successful?
Amazing. Shifting to AI and everything AI and all the noise surrounding, this AI, some call it a bubble that we're in. Everyone's talking about agentic AI. Very few people talk about the legacy systems and platforms and approvals and process and misaligned forecasts that make all of this stuff actually unusable. What's your realistic guidance for executives who are drowning in this hype, and how do they navigate this mess?
I think there's two or three things that come to mind. I think number one, it depends on what type of business you're in. I many days, I was envious of greenfield startup companies that could build everything from scratch and didn't have to deal with legacy systems or operating models or anything in the past. If you're in that world, congratulations. You have your own challenges, but they're different than the ones I'm about to talk about. If you are a legacy organization, if you're a large legacy organization, and if you have tremendous capital investment in existing systems, then you have to break it down and you have to decide what is the most important thing to change and what is the relative cost and return of making changes. And then you iterate through what would be most valuable and what's going to be most cost effective or efficient to change. And you prioritize, and you don't have to do everything at one time. You can very easily make progress doing just one or two things at a time if you choose the right things. And then I do think it's helpful to have a long-term plan that allows you to understand how these things will work together over time toward an enterprise change. And so that you can operate at ground level on the tactical change that you're implementing right now. You can pop back up to 10,000 feet and see how does this fit in a 5-year change. And at the end of 5 years, how are these things going to work together like cogs in a machine that's a new machine? But it takes time. The encouragement that I would give anyone, though, is that you can look at all of it and it can become overwhelming. That the amount of change, the cost of change, the operational and change management complexity of retraining and mobilizing an organization around the change, all those things can be overwhelming. You just have to get started. Use good strategy to figure out the right place to start, and then just get started, and then get better over time. And you'll find that it's amazing as you begin to get wins, small wins. Momentum builds quickly, and as you begin to build momentum, then people that were on the fence move to your side. People that were on the other side move to the fence, and you begin over time to mobilize the organization toward the change as well. And you begin to build confidence that the returns of the change are going to be there. And so you can make slightly bigger bets over time as you start to see success.
Very cool. Jeff, you're now doing executive coaching. What are the themes you see across leaders who struggle to drive transformation versus those who accelerate?
Gosh, good question. I'll go back to some of the themes that I've talked about already. And I'll admit some of this is stylistic in terms of my preference. There are many ways to drive transformation. And I'll give you, two textbook examples. You can do a top-down mandate of change. We will make this change. We will make it on this date. If you can't see your way to be a part of that, then
good luck.
We will move on. So that sometimes that's required. There's a place for that. And then there's change that's change around creating a movement and rolling an organization in a way that uniquely motivates the members of the organization where they opt in and they want to be a part of the change. The latter takes more work in the sense that you have to invest the time in understanding what uniquely motivates the different parts of the organization and how do you ensure that what you build has their fingerprints on it so they can feel a part of the design. So when I am talking to people about transformation, one of the first things I want to do is understand what's the context. What organization are you talking about? What is the environment that you're working in? What's the timeline that you're working in? What are your ambitions? What are your challenges? What things could be barriers? What things could be accelerators? There are many, many questions. And you hope that through asking those questions and listening and being a bit provocative along the way, that it illuminates a path. And the path that becomes clearer to you over time is the right path for transformation in your unique situation. So are there principles of transformation that may apply broadly to many different situations or people that you talk to? Yes, there are certain principles. But I think the real key is to illuminate the path that's the one that's going to be most successful for your unique situation, your organization, your competitive context, your industry context. Those tend to be the ones that stick. I also think that when you illuminate that path, what you find is that in micro moments, there are places for mandates. And in micro moments, there are places where the humanity of influence plays a bigger role. So I think both do play a role. It's not one tool versus the other tool. It's both tools in the moment when they play the most unique role in helping the organization move forward.
Wow. Jeff, final question of the day. And this is both looking ahead and looking, back at the same time. Yeah. What's your advice to the next generation of analytics and marketing leaders who want to build career-defining capabilities just like you have in your career?
One of the things that I've talked about for many, many years is being functionally multilingual. And I don't know if that's a good term or not, but let me tell you what I mean by that. Is if you're a marketing person or a salesperson or an ops person, or a manufacturing person, or an HR person or a legal person or an analytics person, whatever the case may be, invest the time to be conversationally fluent in the other functions. Be fluent in your function, obviously. You have to hold yourself to a world-class standard in your function. But if you invest the time to be conversationally fluent in the other functions, what you'll find is that you become an indispensable leader because you have the ability to bring those teams together, those cross-functional teams together that operate in complex, ugly matrix organizations. You have the ability to speak to them in a way and to hear things when they speak in a way that most people don't hear. And as a result of that, you can find ways to uniquely motivate them and to help them see a path forward that's good for the organization, good for their function, and good for them individually. And so this idea of, again, I don't know if it works or not, but I'm going to continue to use it. This idea of functionally multilingual, I think is incredibly important. And I think the risk that we have to be aware of is as we become a more analytically driven society, I think there's the risk that we become more siloed, and there's the risk that we spend less time face to face, pushing, pulling, debating, listening, compromising, collaborating. We spend less time face to face doing those things. And so I think we have to be on guard for that. And we have to understand that great transformations for the foreseeable future will still have a human heart. And if you take the time to understand all of those around you, you'll be uniquely positioned to lead those transformations, leveraging the best of technology, leveraging the best of all the tools, capabilities that are available to you, but doing it in a way that builds a coalition of the willing and a movement of people that's more likely to sustain and to create a differentiation in the marketplace where people are willing to go over and above what's required of them because they feel like they're part of something bigger than just their job or their function.
Wow. Jeff, I must say, this has been a fascinating chat. I have learned so much myself in terms of obviously across thinking about, how to use deterministic data when it comes to physical retail, but also the transformational and leadership journey that one must go through in order to deliver these types of scaled programs across a huge organization in so many parts of the world. I really want to thank you and I appreciate you sharing your insights, sharing your experience, and would love to have you again on the show in the future.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
What Jeff keeps coming back to is the part most companies try to skip. It's not enough to have insights. You actually have to earn the baton pass and build the operating model that makes media to shelf real in the world of physical retail. If your organization is drowning in AI hype, this episode brings that back to execution. I'm Imtiaz Ahmed, and I help leaders translate AI into outcomes that actually show up on the P&L. Thank you for listening to this episode of Reimagine with AI, and we'd love to see you next time.